Welcome everyone to the Human-Centered Design UAE meetup. We are speaking to you from Dubai. If you are interested in the socials, then you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We will be sharing this talk. We've got a YouTube channel as well. So if you can't make it, or if the time zone is a bit strange, you can catch the rest of it on YouTube. You can find also some of our past meetups since COVID. It's all on YouTube. If you've just joined, if you could type in the chat your, obviously we know your name, but where you're from, who you work for, what you do, what you're hoping to get out of the meetup. Feel free to speak to others in the chat. If you've got questions throughout, then please add your questions to the chat. We will be trying to address as many, if not all of them. Unlike past months, we're going to try a slightly different format where we won't interrupt Christian, our speaker, too often. But if there is a burning question that is critical, I'll kind of jump in and interrupt him. If you want to get in touch with myself or any of the other, there are other co-organizers, which are Katral, Nada, as well as Assad and Greta. So you can find us on LinkedIn. I'll share as well their details. So I'm just going to stop sharing and hand over to Christian. I think I actually, sorry, I skipped your slide, Christian. That's quite poor of me. I'll just go back to what's going on. There we go. So huge thank you to Christian Lomholt, hopefully I'm pronouncing it right, who's the Executive Creative Director at Nodes. He's going to talk to us tonight about reducing risk in your product development with hypothesis-driven design. He is also, as we've chatted about just recently, the creator of Dubai's first design Slack group. We've put a link in the chat. So if you want to keep the conversation going in between our meetups every month, then that's the place to be. If you are looking for work, you want to advertise work, you want to share some links, anything you want to ask to Christian, myself, it's a great place to continue the conversation. So thank you, Christian. We really appreciate you speaking to us tonight. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you for inviting me to speak. I think it's a really awesome platform you have here. Give me a sec. I'm just trying to find the right screen to share. There we go. Cool. So I think let's just jump straight into it. So hypothesis-driven design is something that I've personally used, I think, for the last 4 or 5 years. I think it was a result of, I think, pretty much all good old graphic designers turning UX, UI product designers know that at some point UX came in and became a big thing. And suddenly we needed to focus a little bit more about the experience, or at least it became a thing I would say, in the industry. And at that point, of course, I wanted to really learn, okay, how do you go about this? Where do you start? Like, one thing is picking the specific research method. The other thing is knowing how to go about it. And what is all this talk about, this main problem that we have to look at so we don't make mistakes? And how do we, dive into that problem? And that's when hypothesis design was found. I think it was just a random article me and a friend found at my previous company. And yeah, it has helped us a lot, and I've seen it being used a lot, and I'm still using it to this day, because it is relatively simple to understand, and it is immensely powerful at reducing your risk whenever you're about to launch a new product or starting up a new product, or maybe it's just a feature or a small fix. Whatever it is, this method can be quite valuable. So let's dive in. So I usually like to start with just a simple example to get the point across. So I have made this little fictive story about Mark. So Mark has this dream of opening a food truck. And since Mark has a sweet tooth, he wants to open an ice cream truck. But Mark isn't just going to launch an ice cream truck. Of course, he's just going to do a little bit of research before actually doing that. So he sits down and he starts interviewing the neighborhood about their favorite ice creams, because he needs to know, what's the menu going to consist of. He researched the most efficient trucks so he can save on gas and maybe, find one that has a big fridge or something for the ice. He looks at important ingredients and he looks for the best location where the most people come by so he can sell a lot of ice cream. So he has, I would say, the right mindset about it. So he goes about his things, buys his truck and launches his new ice cream truck. And what happens on opening day is there is no guests. But why? In this example, the reason is that the temperature where Mark lived is simply too cold for selling ice cream on the street. So the ice cream model doesn't work. But the deeper problem here is actually that Mark has two assumptions in the beginning that he does not research. And this is something we see a lot, I'd say, in product design, where you have this basic assumption. In Mark's case, it's that he wants to open a food truck compared to, I would say, a different medium like a restaurant, and he wants to open an ice cream shop because he likes ice cream, without actually diving into if ice cream is the right choice for that combination. But after that, he actually goes about it the right way, right? He starts focusing on how to optimize the ice cream idea. And yeah, I think it points out why, hey, I think someone is drawing on the screen. Can you see that as well? Never mind. I'll continue. But yeah, I think the main point here is that sometimes you just don't get the key problem right. And why don't you do that? It's because you haven't focused on that main problem. So how do you, make sure that when you launch your products, they are awesome? Well, it's all about actually solving the right problems, of course, for the right people with the right solution. And sometimes the question is, does the problem you're trying to solve even exist? And the reason this is so important is that when we launch the stuff, if it's only based on assumptions, and these assumptions are not based on, I would say, data in any way, then we are going to have risk. And this is where hypothesis-driven design comes in, because it helps you look at your assumptions and actually turn them into hypothesis, which you can then validate and find out, hey, is it actually true that people in the neighborhood would like ice cream, which is Mark's first hypothesis or assumption in this case, before it turned into a hypothesis. And through hypothesis-driven design, we list all these assumptions. We turn them into hypotheses, and by doing this, we make them easily testable. It's actually quite simple. We will go through that process in a second. Then we research to validate these hypotheses to make sure, hey, what is actually true and false? And then, of course, if everything turns out great, we're gonna design and build it. And by doing this, we are reducing risk. So let's dive a little bit into it and look at assumptions. So I've been talking a little bit about assumptions and what they are. And I think most people here have, know what an assumption is. It's basically an idea about something. And sadly, often assumptions are based on, I would say, limited knowledge, or at least not like deep research. Sometimes it's also just an idea. An assumption can be something that doesn't, an assumption about an idea that doesn't exist today. So data doesn't exist for that. So in the essence, assumptions are great because they are the foundation for all new things to some degree. We just need to be a little bit careful when we make them, or at least test that what we think is true is actually true. So how do we go about that? And I made this simple illustration, and I'm a product designer myself, and I imagine quite a few people on this call are as well. So I would say a common example of a scenario I meet is we are sitting as a designer, or maybe a small team, you're sitting with product managers or something similar, and you get this, I would say, problem that you need to solve to some degree. And you list out your assumptions, and because you are an expert in your field, you're going to have a pretty good take on it. You can relatively quickly get an idea of this problem. But when we look at the whole problem, then our little idea, illustrated by the, I would say, the purple dot here, is not covering the whole problem. And in this example, it seems like we are within the problem. This could also lie a little bit outside, right? It could mean that we are not actually understanding the problem fully. We might be thinking something is true about the problem, which is, and the problem here is we only have our own assumptions. So a really quick tip for when you start out on a new project with a problem, you of course gather assumptions from other people than yourself. So in an existing product company, a layout could look like this. Let's say we have a new feature coming in, and in this case, we know about a problem that we want to look into. And then we actually just go out and talk to the different departments marked by the, the blue, purple-ish color to the left here. We talk to our developers. They might have an angle we didn't see, and they might see some tech limitations, which would be assumptions as well. We are talking to sales. They are the ones who knows what the customers want or the users want, right? We talk to support, who are the ones who see the, the long-term journey of a user and see the problems they have down the line. And all these people have angles and assumptions that you might not have from the start. On the other side, we also have stuff like competitors. Maybe they have features you don't within the area of the problem you're looking into, or a solution at least. You have partners, and maybe most importantly, customers / users / people / the people you're solving the problem for. These are immensely important as well. Make sure that whatever you think the problem is actually the problem for the people you're about to solve it for. So keep them involved. And I made a little assumption process, which is relatively easy as well. And the way I go about it is I map the people first, as we just did before here, get an overview of all the stakeholders that could be involved here and have an opinion and knowledge on the problem we're looking into. And then you simply plan sessions, and then you interview them. And then you write down all the great assumptions they have. And then you prioritize the assumptions. And this is where risk sneaks back in again, because you, with your expertise as the designer or as the product team, have to, of course, prioritize these assumptions depending on how long your research phase is. If you have several months, you might have time to, I would say, validate everything later on, but often I would say keep it down to 20 to 30 assumptions. And then you would probably be able to pull it off within 2 to 3 weeks, the research of that, for, I would say, 2 people or something like that. Great. So now we have a really good understanding of the problem because we got a ton of assumptions. But how do we know that these assumptions are true? Because they are just assumptions, right? And this is where we need to turn the assumptions into hypotheses. So in this case, I've just taken Mark's, assumption about ice cream. So he's thinking that people are looking for a quick snack in the neighborhood. They would love themselves an ice cream, right? So how do we take this and turn it into something we could test? And I have made this little hypothesis framework, and there are tons of ways you can actually, make your hypothesis, but I like this one because it's relatively simple. So the framework is as follows. We believe that a specific experience for a persona or target group will result in assumed outcome. And we would like the assumed outcome to be something we can actually test. So in this case, we believe that selling ice cream for the neighborhood will result in a lucrative business. And then the whole question is always with an hypothesis is your hypothesis precise enough that you can actually test this? In this case, a lucrative business means that we are earning money. So we could probably maybe do a prototype down the line, like a pop-up ice cream shop as for a day or something like that, to see if people actually want to buy an ice cream or something similar. the main point is you need to be able to test them. So we're turning all these great assumptions into hypotheses, and now we're actually ready to do the hard work, which is the research. But yeah, something I forgot, which is of course important as well, is when you have these assumptions turned into hypotheses, we need to have a little framework that we test with. And again, relatively simple. I like to put it into Excel, basically, and I have the hypothesis on the left, and then I have my different validation states to the right. So is a specific hypothesis true? Is it plausible? Is it false? And then a little note field where you can link to the research you've done that makes the foundation for the answer you put. And the benefit here is several things. One thing is you have your hypothesis gathered in one place. The other thing is when you're making interview guides or something similar later down the line, where you might be able to test more than one hypothesis at the same time, then these sheets are pretty nice to have laying around. So yeah, when we have all the hypotheses in the sheet, we are ready to test. And here comes another choice, and that is you need to decide on which kind of research you're going to do to validate each type of hypothesis. And again, back to my point earlier, you can often hit more than one hypothesis with one method of research, so like especially questionnaires, user interviews, and usability tests to some degree can hit quite a few hypotheses in one go. So these are go-to methods I like to use. But yeah, it can also be data. Sometimes data from your analytics page on your website, if you have that, is going to give you the answer. So there are a ton of ways to do the research. We're going to look at a few methods in a second that I recommend. But in the end, there are probably millions of ways to validate that specific hypothesis. But yeah, once you've decided your research methods, it's just about testing. So you go out and you conduct all the research and you validate the hypothesis. And yeah, when looking at this research, I've written an article about the subject as well with like hypothesis-driven design, and in there I'm linking to a UX kit. I'm not getting affiliate or anything like that. I just really like that UX kit because it opens up for a ton of different methods and small guides to how to use it. So maybe afterwards I can link that in the chat and you can check it out. I think it costs money, just so you know. But yeah, that's pretty cool. But some things you can do right away that doesn't cost you a dime is stuff like user and stakeholder interviews. So that's pretty simple. What you do is, let's say we have the ice cream example here with the lucrative business, then we are just gonna write a little questionnaire going into depth about, hey, how much are you willing to spend on ice cream, and are you even interested in ice creams and stuff like that. Try to make your questionnaire as unbiased as possible. The questions I said right now might be a little bit biased, so that's an art in itself and something you're going to master over time. Try to ask your questions in a way where you're not going to put the words in the person you're interviewing's mouth, and so the data you get is as valid as possible. So that's a great one, and I use this for both the user, but also support or whoever else was involved in the assumptions. These people can be involved again when you actually test it, because whatever sales said might be debunked to some degree by something support said, or vice versa. A little extra note here is a good thing is actually using several methods on one hypothesis as well. So the more different methods of research you use on one hypothesis, I would say the more risk you're reducing, right? The more clear the answer will be if whatever we said is actually true or false. But let's continue with the methods. Usability test, most of you definitely know, I think. So if you are within the product design world, it's really easy. We just smack something down in Figma, Sketch or something similar, put it into a prototyping software like InVision, and we test it. And this is really good for, especially if it's something like very product or service related. And yeah, something like Zoom, put up a camera and see what people are looking and interacting with on your screen, and you quickly have some data that can help you validate the hypothesis. Questionnaire, really good as well. Again, one of the methods that hopefully can tick off a ton of hypotheses at once, at least if they are within the same area, is the questionnaire. And here, it's very similar process-wise to making the user interview sheet. This is just phrasing your questions in a way that are unbiased as much as possible, and then we send them out to a target group where the questions are valid, or at least would be valuable for answering if something is true or not. I think stuff like something like SurveyMonkey are free to use to some degree, so that can be recommended for that. Analytics, probably know as well. Sometimes it's available, sometimes it's not. If it is, that is golden as well, as a quantitative view on if something is true or not. And split test for the last test we're looking at today is great for the very simple things. Maybe sometimes you just need a red or the yellow door. What does people prefer? And when it's something like that, the split test comes in handy. And that's used a ton in product design as well. As you probably know, you can do more than the red and yellow door. You could do 10 different types of onboarding or something like that in an app experience or something similar, to see, okay, what actually works. Are people willing to give their phone number on the first step, or do you need to build a little bit of trust beforehand, and so on. So that's just a little view on a few tests that I often see integrated into this process. But once we've done all the testing, it's all about the hypothesis results. And this is where stuff becomes pretty cool, because it links so perfectly with the next step of product development. We now have a way better idea of what problem we are trying to solve, and what all the different stakeholders who will be involved in the final product has to say about this problem, and maybe also the solution to some degree. And we have validated it as well, so we know what's probably true and what's probably not true. And this kind of builds the foundation of your user stories for that product, because you're gonna know, hey, what does the users actually want or think, both like what they see in the problem, but also what they see in the solution. So often we've actually just been able to convert a lot of the positive hypothesis into user stories to some degree, and that helps us a lot with the roadmap. So that's the research part of it. And what happens afterwards, I think most of you know, this is classic design thinking, right? We start ideation phase to find out, okay, how's the solution gonna look like? Maybe we prototype it, we go out and test, and we launch it. Or maybe we don't. Maybe we find out that the problem we see is actually not there. And this is where, again, hypothesis-driven design is just epic, because you get a ton of insight very, very early, and it's actually quite cheap as well, because this can be pulled off by a very small amount of people. And you're really gonna get the answers, I'd say, to if this is something you should go on with or not. And if you go on with it, is it the original direction you thought it was, or is it something, a little bit more to the right or left, or whatever you learned in that process? So yeah, I think it is time for a quick case example. Jonathan, I don't know if we have any questions you want to dump in, or if you want me to just...
I don't have any questions. I had a few, but I might save them. Some of the questions were like very much related to your case example. So like, what would you recommend and when, those kinds of questions I personally had in mind, but I'm keen to see your, like, let's maybe dive into a more specific case, and then we can, we can.
Nice. And we can always go back a little bit and dive into them afterwards as well, definitely, if you want.
Yeah, but feel free if anyone's got questions, jump in.
Just write them in the chat, and we can talk about it in a second. The case is relatively short. I'll just take a sip of water and we'll go on again.
Sure.
So, employee scheduling software. This is an example from the previous company I worked at. They had a pretty cool scheduling software that helped restaurant staff and hotel staff and fitness staff getting an overview of their schedule, like when were they supposed to work, and they could book their holiday, they could see who they were working with on a certain day, and they could plug in and out. And this company is at this stage in the startup life, they were at what we call a scale up, which means they had just raised a ton of money and they were ready for just, you know, reaching the stars. And with that, what we often see is, hey, it's time for a redesign of the whole platform. And when that happens, we of course, or we should of course, look at not only the visual parts of it as well, we should also look at the user experience. Are they, you know, the key flows inside our product great, or could we actually improve them now that we are redeveloping a lot of the front end already? So we have been looking a lot at you know, the different parts of the app. We had redesigned it a ton, and we had one main assumption left, I'd say, and that was based around the schedule. Because the schedule, as you can see on the left, this is actually an actual screenshot of the schedule. The schedule were quite, I would say, clustered, and it, especially in a big restaurant where you could have like 200 employees, this view was just crazy. And it would be really hard to find yourself, and it would be really hard to get an overview of who you were working with. And yeah, we were just talking a lot about it. It was one of the last things we needed to do, and we saw it everywhere. Like everyone was talking about this view that this is just not working. You need to find a solution. And of course, we had an idea in mind, and that was the day view. And day view, I would say the main thought is just you get everything served on a silver platter. Like, when are you meeting in today? What's the daily note? Who are you working with? And if, I don't know, if you need to call someone, the name, you know, the number is here. And it was just super simple, and it really made sense. And we have been waiting for the day to be able to actually do this. And it comes around. We get the go ahead. Hey guys, go make that debut now. It seems like the time. And at this point, of course, we've learned a little bit about hypothesis-driven design, so we go about it the right way. So we talk with our sales team, our support team. We do a lot of customer interviews. We actually do a lot of usability testing as well. We, you know, gather people into the office. I think we had 15 to 20 user interviews or something like, usability tests or something like that, where we really got an in-depth idea about how are we going to make the perfect debut. And after, I think we had a research phase of, I don't know, 3 weeks again or something like that, we got a ton of answers. And yeah, what did we learn? We actually learned that schedule weren't that important. It works fine. People don't mind it. It is a little bit confusing, but a lot of the functionality that we thought they needed, they actually had elsewhere to some degree. And the things we would add weren't that important that it was needed right now, at least. There was a lot of things that were way more important that we didn't know. For example, notifications were really unstable. Something called the shift overview, which was actually a little bit similar to the day view, had some small things that could be improved to kind of solve the problem we saw on schedule. And then a huge one, which I think a lot of people can relate to as well, is just loading speed and performance. And this was actually a little bit of an aha moment for me and the team, because we just suddenly felt we had no idea, like we had no idea what the customers actually wanted. How could we be so wrong? And that was definitely a wake-up call to some degree. Like, we need to talk way more with our customers, and we need especially to validate our roadmap a lot more and actually find out if the problems we see and hear about, because it was not like no one had ever mentioned schedule before. A lot of people actually had mentioned schedule, but when you hear it from 10 people and you have a user base of, I don't know, 200,000 people daily, then those 10 people might be the few people who are annoyed, and the rest actually don't really care. They think it's fine. And I think especially in a scale-up and startup environment, you build for the 80 to 90%. And not the 10 out of 200,000 people, which might have been the mistake here. So what was the outcome of this? I think a lot of it came down to, we made a really, really quick research phase, which saved the company a ton of money and time and risk as well, right? And we had, I think, 4 developers standing by to build this, and that would require a project manager and so on. It would probably take 3 to 6 months to nail it. We had a pretty heavy backend, so the turnaround could be a little slow. And it actually meant we also started getting a lot better understanding of what the customers wanted. Like we started to do more interviews. UX really came on the board of the company to some degree. Suddenly everyone was very fascinated about this magic way of suddenly knowing what was the right choice. So in this specific case, we did not only reduce risk, I'd say to some degree avoided failure, especially in these companies that has, you know, a lot of investments and you need to scale with a certain speed to keep up the momentum. 3 to 6 months for 4 of your developers, that's high risk. We might have made it anyway, and we might have, you know, just taken the things afterwards. But from, I'd say, a risk perspective, and especially a money perspective, that is a really bad, you know, choice. So I think it was worth the investment, and I think it's one of the cases where it really had a major impact. I'd say often you have the feeling that, okay, this, I learned a ton. My initial solution probably wasn't the best one. Now that I understand the whole problem, I've learned a lot of things. Now I know how to, you know, start my ideation phase with the right look. But this was an example where, okay, the whole ideation phase was just, you know, thrown away, and a new focus was born, and a new hypothesis-driven approach could start from the start, and some of these new things we learned about, right? And yeah, that's the employee scheduling case. I went over it. I tried to keep it relatively short to just get the main points across. I think the main takeaways for hypothesis-driven design is you get a really good understanding of the problem, which is going to reduce your risk. It basically builds your research structure to some degree as well, because it helps you put the focus down on the paper, like what is important, what do we actually think is true, and that helps you build the plan, which we saw earlier. Less risk, as mentioned. I think I've repeated that a lot of times, and I'm going to say it again. It really does reduce risk, and it is worth the time, especially if it's a bigger feature that you can't just quickly do a split test on. If it's a major direction for the company, then this should be an absolute must, or something similar at least. And then the last one, which is, I think, especially from a design perspective, but I imagine development perspective as well, is stakeholder management. Because I think a lot of us has experienced that someone from the company, probably maybe a founder or a C-level or someone way up high, you know, has a gut feeling about which direction is the right one. Maybe they, you know, had a cup of coffee with a friend and suddenly got this great idea for this amazing feature. And your gut feeling says that this might not be the best idea, or maybe it sounds cool, but often these ideas are high risk, because we never did any research to actually validate if whatever we are suddenly building out of the blue makes sense. And this is where a quick hypothesis-driven design approach can help you get the arguments right, at least, for whether this is a good direction for the company or not. And if it's, most importantly, something your users or customers would like. Does it actually solve something for them? Is it something they need? And I think that is actually the end of the slides. So yeah, let's bring on the questions. Jonathan, if you mentioned you had any, maybe we had some in the meantime, sure, as well.
I wanted to ask you as well. There's a lot of similarities between what you've spoken and experimentation, product experimentation models, which you know, share a lot of the methodologies you've shared, and product companies look at that. Is that something you also look at? Is that a part of this, just called a different thing? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think in this specific case, like, hypothesis is something we see in, you know, it might be a new thing to some degree for designers, but in other fields like basic science, it's just standard, right? You always have your hypothesis if you're doing research. That's just, you know, a standard thing. So I think this is something that exists with many names. Where it really stands apart for me, at least when I look at classic design thinking process, is the high focus on gathering assumptions from more than one, I would say, group. So not only you and the customers, it's also, different departments and stakeholders from different parts of the company, but also different kinds of customers and so on. And same goes for the actual testing, that you test the hypothesis on, more than one group. But other than that, I definitely agree that, I mean, this exists in many similar forms, and as I don't care what you call it, if you do it, it's great, and hopefully you're going to reduce your risk. So yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to maybe share something that we do here, which is, again, like not to argue, but just to complement a lot of what you've been saying. I'm just gonna stop you sharing and just share my screen, because I think it's great that we'll have more time to kind of have more of an open discussion, which is a methodology we use in some areas. We're trying to mature it to all areas, but it's basically, and this exists in software, a whole bunch of different software. We use Confluence. We've got rid of some of those software, which is, what is your idea? What assumption is it based on? What insights informs your assumption? What are the expected business outcomes? What is the reach? Even if, it could be an amazing idea, but the reach could be tiny. Related to execution and validation of the idea, how will it be tested? Expected time to statistical significance, because while qualitative methods are great, if we want real impact from a product sense, obviously we need like the analytics you were talking about, and understanding, if we experiment with 10% of our audience or 20% or whatever, what is needed to test this idea, team tracking assets. And then there's many ways of writing the same thing, right, which you shared. We believe that based on this assumption, if successful, we will increase blah because of whatever. Which again, just to complement kind of some of what you've been saying. But yeah, and like to your point, I don't know how many designers are mature enough to be thinking in that lens, right? What are your thoughts on that, Christian?
I think like exactly what you showed there is the perfect approach, right? You have all the different, areas of everything from assumptions to what to test to, how are you actually gonna set your KPIs for this specific thing we're testing? Like, did it actually help? Did we reach whatever we thought we would? So I think, yeah, there are a lot of different methods. And I think, as you said here in the end, that a lot of people are not actually doing this. And this is where the problem arrives. And this is probably often why we see, products not going as people thought they would. So to me, it's something, it surprised myself, right? As I told that, wow, why haven't I done this before? Wait, my headphones just ran out of power. 1 second. Yeah, one, why hadn't I done this before? And two, how simple it was, right? And how easy it was to go about. And then of course, the whole research part, that is a science in itself. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we hear you fine. We can hear you. Hopefully you can hear us. Can you hear us? Can you hear us, Christian? So while you're setting that up.
I'm back.
You're back? Okay, yeah, great. No, so yeah, I think that the challenge for design teams, so like one of the challenges we have, our design team has, is, which would be great, to hear other voices and people on the call as well, is how much qual do you do? How much quant do you do? How much data do you have? How much, analytics, customer support, like all of those voices, triangulating all of that data to make decisions is not often simple, it's both art and science, I feel sometimes, and different stakeholders have different agendas. So it's even if you have that methodology, it looks nice and clean, but it's also, I think, just experimentation of the approach itself and learning from seeing success, because sometimes with all of the right data, you still don't see positive traction in what you feel from, say, qualitative research like usability testing. Makes a huge amount of sense. We're simplifying our product. We're making it, quicker, more intuitive, more delightful, but we're not seeing massive changes in our traffic or conversion, for example. And sometimes it's frustrating because you're like, come on, like,
Yeah.
have you experienced that? Like, what are your thoughts on that? And there's a lot of questions. I do want to jump into everyone's questions. So.
Yeah. So just can you rephrase the question again?
So the question was, how do you reconcile all that data to be meaningful and impactful?
So when you decide which kind of method you want to use, so there's two things, right? If you already know what you're going to test, you can kind of analyze your data to find the answers in there. If it's the other way around, where you have the data but are not sure how to learn from the data, then that is a different talk, right? Then it's all about, setting up the right funnels and stuff like that inside your analytics software. But I think, it's actually quite a hard question. I think it's being logic about it. Like, what do you have available? Having a good understanding of the data before you decide to use the analytics as your method of validation. So I would say, if let's say we have a situation where we need to understand if we have an assumption that people are going to buy this specific thing if we put it on the front page in our main carousel, right? Then previous data on that specific item would probably tell if it's normally something that people clicks and interacts with, no matter the content, and so on. And is that different in clicks depending on what we put there, or is it just a general thing that because we put it up front, it's something people are going to interact with? So it's hard to, I don't know if that to some degree answered the question. It's a hard one, I think.
No, that's okay. We didn't bring you to ask all the easy ones, right? I'm going to start with the last question first, just because I think I did, kind of name and shame Tanya. So she's asking, I tend to consider hypothesis testing evaluative design research. So I do it after ideation, at the point when we're ready to test concepts, a value proposition. Do you not do exploratory or generative research before coming up with a hypothesis? Or are you suggesting to just skip all that and test some hunches based on your own experience?
That is a good question. So something I maybe briefly, or maybe didn't even really mention, is that of course you need this core problem. And that core problem or core solution or whatever you have that you want to focus on could either be something new or it could be something existing. Like in the last case I told, like there was quite a lot of previous research to some degree that indicated that that specific day view was important. But in Tanya's scenario, I fully agree that in discovery and ideation, if it's, a new feature or something new, then get a pretty good idea of what you want to solve or what problem you're going to work with beforehand. So exactly like she suggests there, like get the foundation before you start testing.
Cool. So we'll go back to the start of the questions. How would you manage someone who says, we know this, there's no need to do research, to accept hypothesis-driven design?
So that is a really, really hard question as well. I might have an answer that I use, and that's taken from a YouTube video by, I can't remember his name. I can find it in the on YouTube afterwards and post it in the chat. But it's pretty cool. So it's all about risk, right? And when I'm calling, this whole talk, reduce risk with hypothesis-driven design. It's because reducing risk is something that stakeholders like. Because it's like, let's say we are going to a casino or something similar. Imagine if we can reduce or increase the chance of winning in a game, then we are going to earn more money, right? And it's basically the same every time we launch a product or feature. We are taking a large risk, and if we can reduce the risk, there's a higher chance of winning. So the way you go about it is, let's say that we have a talk with this specific person about an assumption, and they want to build it, and we are a little bit in doubt. We feel like research needs to be done before we can conclude if it's a good idea or not. Then the person says no, as in your example, hey, I don't think that's a good idea. I think we should just launch it. We already know a lot about this. It's a good idea. We don't need to test. Then you should try to change the conversation into risk. So the way you could do that is, one, ask, okay, great, so what research have we done? I would actually like to see that research. For me to be able to do my job, I need to just get an overview. Also, when I'm supposed to build this, that would, make the product better. And then the person might say, nah, that's not even needed. I've seen it and I don't know where it is, but I know it's true. And now we've already, laid the foundation here. So now we can say, okay, cool. But then in that case, you are taking a risk. I'm not taking a risk. You are taking a risk, which means you are the risk taker. So let's look a little bit about what we gain from this specific thing that you and I are going to build together. And that could be, a brilliant product, but let's also talk about what happens if it fails, because that's your risk on your table right now. And if we're going to launch this and we've used a ton of resources to build it, then all that risk were on your shoulders, whereas I could just, go out, give me a few weeks and I can test it. And that risk would be on my shoulders now. I've done the research. I probably, know a lot better if this is a good idea or not. And we're going to have a way bigger chance of actually making it. So that's, I would say, a way to go about it. And I've seen it work quite a few times, because suddenly the person suddenly they understand what kind of risk they're taking by just suggesting an idea without a foundation.
Yeah, great point. I think I just want to also call out on that. You reminded me of a really excellent talk in Perth by a guy who was just basically, it was kind of like an unconference, and his talk, which was voted up, was just a book review by, the book was called Thinking in Bets, Making Smarter Decisions When You Don't Have All the Facts, by Annie Duke. And she, I think, is like the former, I don't know, like poker champion or something. But basically the thinking, I haven't read the whole book, but just it's, if you had to, every decision we make in life, if we had to actually gamble or make a bet on that decision, would you put money on these decisions? So if you, like you say, if you talk about risk, or if you reframe what people come in with saying, yeah, we have enough known knowns, we don't need to do research, to say, well, are you willing to put your own money, not the companies, but your own money on the bet that you're just saying? I think it's probably a different topic. It's a great question, is how do you get buy-in for research? We did have a research talk. I don't know if it's on YouTube. I think it might be. Yeah, whoever asked that question definitely referenced it. But yeah, love your answer there, Christian. The next question is, when do product metrics come into the picture during the experiment-driven design, especially for early stage startups? Another good question.
I think I need a little bit more information on that just to be able to answer it. So what exactly do you mean? Like product metrics come in picture during the experiment design?
I guess, I think they're asking, and Safula, sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, is, it's a similar, I think, question to some what we've covered, is when do you go to market with your bet? Like if you don't have product metrics for an early stage startup, at what point do do some of these hypothesis does data come into the picture? Does that make sense?
So, yeah, I think it makes sense.
Or in other words, to simplify it, how do you validate an idea in an early stage startup?
Yeah. So I think that's a really good question. So especially in the start, we don't really have the quantitative data available, right? So we're going to have to rely a little bit on the qualitative. And this is where something like a lean approach, I don't know if people have read the book Lean Startup. If not, it's really good. That's a little bit of an alternative to this research world as well. And what Google did with the I think, VR cardboard glasses before actually building I don't remember if they are the ones behind Oculus or something like that. Doesn't matter. But my point is that if you are early and you cannot get the data of the research, then you could change your thought process into saying, okay, could we make a solution so cheaply, and like just going straight to solution mode on this, could we make a solution so cheap and so quickly that we could actually test and just find out from the start if the solution works or not? This, of course, has, some risk as well, because you're building solution for a problem you might not fully understand, but at least you did it cheap and you might have time to try a few more solutions quickly. So that could be a way to go about it. And that's what they talk about in the lean startup, like fail fast. Because that's a really quick way to gain knowledge as well. And just go out there and try it if you're unsure, instead of, trying to find data. And it can be really hard to gather, all that data if you are a small startup and you don't have the network within the industry you're about to launch in, and so on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the only thing I'd add there as well, like working with some early stage startups, is I would go back a step and look at, before nothing's new under the sun. How are people solving the problem today? Understand the way it's solved today from an interview or a ethnography. If you got an ethnographer, or you can hire one or outsource to one, there's one on the call, then have a look and understand how people are solving the problem today, because that would help you shape how you think it should be solved tomorrow, or what the MVP is of tomorrow, as opposed to, I think sometimes people, especially early stage startups, just rush to design and usability testing without proper exploration of the problem space. But yeah, totally agree with you. You need to get stuff out there, quickly learn. And if you don't have the quant, then you got to do the qual. Yeah, great answer. The next one is, have you used the 5 whys method, and how effective is it compared to another method you commonly use in research? Interesting question.
So in this specific case, I haven't used the 5 whys. I think I've heard the name before, but I wouldn't be able to tell you what it's about. So I'm not sure I'm the right one to answer that question. Maybe you, Jonathan, have any experience there?
Yeah, I mean, it's digging into, it's asking, why. And then when someone answers that, following up with another why. I mean, typically in research, you don't ask why 5 times, because you'll make people completely mad. Sometimes we've even found in some companies, we need to, in the introduction of the research, make sure that they understand what is about to happen if they've never done it before. Because if I ask you why a lot, it'll feel like an interrogation. It can be quite overwhelming. But definitely, I think one of the biggest tips I give to designers who haven't done a lot of research or usability testing is, don't just follow the script. Follow every question with at least, let's say, 1 or 2 whys. And even if you think you heard the answer, if you ask an extra why, you'll be really surprised, because it'll make the person think and go, hang on, why do I do that? And they might tell you something you never even, that's when some of the true gold comes out. I'm interested in also, if you don't mind, asking someone who knows far more than I do, hopefully she doesn't mind, I'm gonna ask her to unmute, Tanya, who is ex many amazing places, currently at Talabat. Do you want to take this one as our resident, dedicated researcher.
Which one? Which question?
The question was, have you used the 5 whys method, and how
Yeah.
is it compared to another method commonly used in research?
Sure. I mean, that's a really good method to use when you're doing exploratory research or even generative research, and you're trying to get beyond, these surface levels explanations of what people are doing. And you're right. If you do it in a certain way, it can feel like an interrogation. But if the conversation is friendly enough, the worst that will happen is they'll think you're stupid, because the question is obvious, right? But you can't, or the answer is obvious. You can't use something as data unless it's actually spoken. But in normal everyday conversation, there's a lot that goes unsaid. Just because we're all, working within the same culture, we have kind of an understanding. Unless you're 3 years old, you don't have to have every little thing explained to you. But at the point that you're doing this sort of qualitative research, you have to have that data. Someone has to say it. Another way that 5 whys is used is in what's called root cause analysis. And so it can be used in a very analytical way if you're trying to dig for a root cause. But the 5 whys in design thinking usually has to do a little bit more with exploration and really getting someone to give you a full explanation of not just functionally how they do something. If you're researching, for example, to develop a product within a company, you might go to one of your coworkers and you're trying to design something for them. And you say, okay, whenever you have to answer a customer question, what do you do? And they say, well, I go through, I read my email, I see I have a customer question, and I hit reply, and I do this. And then you can make them actually think about why they do it that way. Because you're trying to design something better for them. And it's a good way of kind of exploring beyond just the functional day-to-day, I do this and it's my routine, and it helps you dig deeper.
Nice. That was really informative.
Awesome. You see, that's why I,
Yeah, nice.
So great question. Great to have you on the call, Tanya. Thank you. The next question is interesting, and I've had a few people kind of reply privately, but it'd be great to hear your take on it, Christian. What if I have a new business idea which has an untapped market in the target location, e.g. UAE? I'd assume there is a definite need for the product, okay? But the potential buyer has no understanding of the proposed solution / product, and because of that, almost no data for its demand. What are the research and testing ideas can you suggest to validate the business idea hypothesis?
So there are several ways to go about this, and it of course relies a little bit about how much time you have yourself, but if this exists somewhere else, I think Jonathan's competitor analysis, as he mentioned a little bit earlier, is a really good way to go about it. Has anyone done this before, and why does it work in those locations? If that is not available, then we have a few other cards on our hand. There's always the prototype, right? That us actually going into solution mode. But we could also try to get a better understanding of that specific need, because in this sentence we assume there is a definite need, right? But what does that mean? The potential buyer has no understanding of the proposed solution yet, because of that, almost no data for its demand. So if we have an idea for a solution, we could probably phrase questions or show potential solutions or small flows or something like that to the people who, would be the people we would solve something for in this case. And by doing that, we would create our own data. So yeah, I think it's all about just being creative. Can we somehow, make that data when it doesn't exist? And if it exists in other areas, that's 100% where I would start, and just really understand their business model. Why does it work in this other location? How did they go about it? How they're making money, and all those things you need to think about when it's a new business.
Yeah, definitely. I think someone replied privately also and raised a great point in that this is quite typical of how things are done in emerging markets like Dubai, where the solution or product is imported from somewhere else in the globe, and you're trying to sell an idea without necessarily understanding demand or product market fit in the market. So you're trying to look for a problem with a solution as opposed to address a problem with a human-centric solution. So sometimes, like entrepreneurs might come in or startups. That's what the person shared with me, which is a very valid point. I think we just need to be careful of doing that. And also, even like for Property Finder, for example, like what I love about this meetup, it's a great place to just share successes and failures, not just the happy path, but the methodology of the past with the other markets. So the Middle East, North Africa, has been whatever has worked in Dubai to do in those markets. Hasn't been a huge success in majority of markets. It's worked in certain areas of those markets, but in other areas, for the majority of the growth markets, it in actual fact hasn't worked. And it's only through research on the ground, by understanding product market fit and those markets, which are very different from each other and from Dubai, that we can deliver tailor-made solutions, not just try to repurpose what works in Dubai or Australia or Denmark or Israel or wherever. What did you want to add there, Christian?
I think you're nailing it there. I think if you're really good at checking if there is a market fit and you can do the proper research, then you probably have a relatively good bet or good start on that, I would say, startup copy in the new market. And a lot of businesses are actually doing this. I've heard about especially Germany copying from the US, where like a small team just made, I think, 4 or 5 huge products by just copying the US. And they were probably really good at, one, understanding why it worked in the US, and 2, understand how to adapt it to the German market. And I think that's just the same here. If it works somewhere else, you of course need to understand why it works in that place. And if that is a valid thing in Dubai, there's so many things that are probably going to be different. Maybe Qatar and Dubai and Abu Dhabi might have some things in common, whereas if you take it to Oman, suddenly everything changes in a way bigger way. It's just an example, but yeah, I think you said it right.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. VV is suggesting everyone reads Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Great book. There's also an Audible version, and all of these people who do abridged versions, if you want to listen to the book in half an hour or an hour or whatever, definitely recommend that too. We've shared, I think somebody else shared, I also shared Thinking in Bets. And next question is from Noah. How do you estimate the number of interviews / usability tests you need to sufficiently validate your idea as an early stage startup developing a new product?
So I'm pretty sure Tanya has a good answer to this one, but I normally go with I think it's about 6 to 8 people, then we hit about 80% to 90% of the main things. And so that has been my rule of thumb, but I don't know if you guys want to add something to that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if people haven't heard of that, it sounds like we've got a few folks who are in early stage startups. I think it's a great reference that you call. I'm just trying to find it. I've got it. It's kind of in the standard, what is human-centered design slide deck, which is, I think, a fellow countryman. Funny enough, I don't think I've ever had a Danish speaker, so it's nice, Christian. Jacob Nielsen's originally Danish, isn't he?
Sounds Danish.
So he's like the godfather of usability testing. He's the guy who invented usability testing, like in the 80s. It's been around for quite a while. And the Nielsen Norman Group in the US, I'm sure you've heard of him. They not only are consultants, but they also run a thing called Usability Week in pre-COVID in like maybe 4 or 5 different countries. So they constantly travel the globe teaching not only usability testing, but a bunch of other design things they have involved over time. And the graph that they have is exactly what Christian said. So if you speak to 6 to 9 people per audience group, right? So it's not saying I've got a 2-side marketplace and I'll speak to 1 data point from each one of those things. But if this is your audience, whatever that might be, this persona, then you will get to, I think it's something like 80% of people with, I don't know, whatever, 6 people. But obviously, like anything, you need to, I think you need to speak to those people and see this pattern. And I'm sure Tanya's been doing it a lot longer than I have, but for about 20 years, I've seen this pattern in every industry I've worked in. And often when we speak, sometimes if we're consultants and we speak to more people because we want to sell more interviews and make more money, then we say to ourselves, why did we speak to that many people? Because we could have gotten to the same answer with less people. It was just more work. It was more analysis. Or if the government makes us do it or whatever other reasons. But the idea is speak to less people, get to that number, and then iterate. Make changes to your design, speak to another group of whatever. But again, if we're talking to multiple different audiences, then it could be more people, right? We could be, say, I don't know, doing 12 people with 3 groups of 4. You obviously, it depends on exactly what you're doing and how specific it is.
I just got reminded of something now that if we have a lot of startup guys or girls for that sake in the chat. So I'm a startup person myself, love startups, and something you can actually do with, I would say, this hypothesis approach is use it in other areas than just your, I would say, product development. So something where I often see, especially if you come from a product background and you go into the marketing part of a startup as well, you can apply this very much in the same way, because you're probably going to have a budget, or you need to reach some people or get some, I don't know, organic growth going in one way or another. And unless you are very experienced in that area, you're going to, be a little bit, on rock bottom there. And you can start out with the assumptions here as well, like how are we going to get people into our funnel and get them to use our product, and involve, different people in that target group as well. Or maybe, a marketing person who can give that take and so on, and then build from there and actually start testing marketing methods and so on. And I would really recommend that, because that's something where I've, hit my head a few times. You have so much experience in designing products, but when you're launching, how do you actually go about that? And you can really quickly spend a lot of money by just, trying to make the perfect ad because you are a good designer, right? And you think you know what people want. So yeah, I would recommend doing that as well.
Yeah. So while we've been talking, Chi Hong Chan, again, apologies if I mispronounced your name, asked me privately, which I just wanted to answer. I shared an article. Do you think, with respect to the previous question, where countries like Malaysia and Singapore, where it is multicultural, Dubai is extremely multicultural, by the way, culture will affect the number of subjects needed for usability testing? So the answer is no. And also, if you read this Medium post I've put by, what's her name? I'll just click on the link, sorry. It's the lady, Indy Young, who's quite famous. I think ex-Google, has done a lot on empathy. So she talks about describing personas that if we compare, I don't know, somebody in one continent, I don't want to name continents, so people, so it's not polarizing, and say a young girl and an old man in a whole other continent, if for whatever your product or service is, the core job to be done is quite similar, then we're all human, regardless of those culture differences. For whatever it is you're creating, their job to be done is the same. So their behavior is not going to be massively different. So this article talks about not looking at personas and putting people's faces or races, but actually looking at the things that do make a difference, as opposed to some of the things that we invest so much time in creating personas that are actually inaccurate. But so yeah, just on that point, I think, yes, we need, when we test in these small samples, to have a diverse sample set. We don't want to talk to the exact same kind of person, but at the same time, we need to be aware that for whatever it is we're testing, that what is that core job to be done? What really are we testing here? And are we testing learnability, usability, findability? I mean, those key problems are probably going to be potentially, for whatever, again, that audience is, irrespective of some of these minor differences. But obviously, whatever, that's a whole other talk in and of itself. The next question is, thank you, Tanya, using behavior and motivation instead of demographics. Much simpler way of what I was trying to say. Thanks, Tanya. So the next question is, are there accessible ways to reach users for usability testing besides your personal ecosystem? Do you want to take that one, or do you want me to take it quickly? I think it's quite an easy one.
Yeah, I think it's one is your own. I think it depends on how you see your own ecosystem, right? Because your friends or your colleagues might know other people, right? So if you can go out a few, links, then you have a pretty wide reach, I'd imagine. But otherwise, there is services you can use for something like that. Or if you are good at LinkedIn, I know there are a ton of ways to find people in there, and I know a lot of these like large interview and usability companies just have people hired full-time to search LinkedIn for people within niche groups. So yeah, I think, do you have anything to add to that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think the key thing, especially for startups, is not to waste time. Like, I've been involved in both Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and in Australia with many accelerators, incubators, and you see people saying, just do guerrilla research, go into a coffee shop. But if those people are not your customers, then it's a waste of your time. You need to understand who is the customer, which often requires some time. Don't make the assumption that you know or assume that everyone is your customer. And you need to then find where those people are. So wherever those people are, like you were saying, Christian, there are methods in using outsourcing, using recruiters or whatever, you yourself advertising on social media and having some sort of a screener or a survey to say, answer a bunch of questions. Based on those things, you will know if that person is a potential customer or not. Because initially you do want to find, especially in early stage startups, those core customers. Yes, we can convert non-customers into customers, but initially you want to get that low-hanging fruit and get buy-in, right, for your idea. So I think the key thing is don't just ask your mother, your sister, your brother, your network, but find about who are those customers, where do they hang out, and how can you reach them? What social media platform do they use? And or I think the other important thing is there are tools that let you do this. So there's a thing called, some of them are expensive, some of them are per test, where you can do usability testing. It could be unmoderated, which means you don't actually do it, the machine does it, and you fill in your questions, or they have templates for that. But part of the tool is the credits you buy are for the certain demographics, or it can include a screener to say, these are the kind of people I want to test. And you can have mixed results with those. Some of them work, depends what you're trying to do. But I think it's just worth, yes, thank you. Usertesting.com is a very expensive one, but there's another one. There's quite a few new ones emerging that are per credit. Yeah, thanks for everyone sharing those. So I think, yeah, that's just worth calling out. The next question is, how do you prioritize customer needs? Are there any best practice methods? They're planning on using Kano model to group features, but wondering if you have any ideas. So what are your preferences, Christian, for prioritizing customer needs or prioritization methodology? I guess that could be, I don't know, it's a whole other meetup, right? We could
yeah. So I think that again, okay, that's a little bit hard to answer, because where are we right now? Are we with our own specific product trying to solve a specific thing for these customers, and then they have a group of needs that we need to solve with our product, or is it just a general understanding of our customers' needs? Do you know that, Jonathan?
Yeah, look, I guess it's also, I think it's quite, I don't think there's a perfect methodology like anything, right? My answer to that would probably be, like you say, it really depends on the maturity. How big is your team? Are you doing it yourself? Are you outsourcing it to a company, a consultancy such as your own? Christian, have the people who are practicing that methodology got the experience of using it before, or are you just taking a canvas offline off the internet and trying to do it for the first time? Every methodology has its pros and cons. It's like design. It's applying the right methodology to whatever problem you're up to. So yeah, I don't know, Wayne, where kind of you're at, but I think like, yeah, there's no right answer. Like Kano is great. There's a bunch of, again, like Isobar, the consultancy I used to be a part of, that was one of the modules we trained organizations in, which was prioritization. And it really, that was sourced by the business and the decision makers. Is it cost of delay? Is it like, what are those metrics? Is it value to the customer? Is it, there could be a lot of different things we put on.
I might have a little input to it that can be pretty nice. It's not an exact, I would say, sorting method or prioritization method that you have control over. It's actually the customer that does it. But something like NPS score, like a tool like Vaynerchuk, for example, where if you have a large platform, you ask the customers if how likely would they be to recommend this specific product to a colleague or friend or whatever, and then they rate it between, I think it's 0 and 10, and then they can answer with a little comment. So that's something we used in my previous company, and the way that prioritizes customers' needs is once you get enough people through that loop, you basically have a Reddit front page of all your features in your app. Like, what do people want? Because people are going to say the same things. You can categorize the answers that you get depending on stars and so on. And suddenly you're going to know that, hey, in our product, the support system is just horrible because everyone mentions it and they give it, 0 to 3. And it's all about this. I think it's, if I remember correctly, it's 0 to 6 or 7. You are, what's it called? It's called you're probably not going to use or recommend it to anyone. Then you have these the motor, like I think that is correct. And then 7 to 8 I think is you kind of unbiased, and then the 9 to 10 is okay, you're actually going to recommend this. And I think it's really cool. Okay, you're actually using it, Jonathan.
Sorry.
Okay, sorry. I just thought you were saying it was a tool you've used.
No, so yeah, not that one, but okay. Someone messaged me privately, so I thought I'd share. I found the name of the.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. No, but definitely great point. I mean, I also had a few other private messages to answer this question, which I've heard of in the past as well, which is giving monopoly money and asking users to prioritize features they want with a budget of whatever, 100 dirham. I mean, I've also seen that not for users, but asking the team to prioritize with monopoly money because it whatever kind of gamifies, and also what bets are you validating. But there's, I think, like from a more of a product mindset, the question is also what is the value to, again, that product market fit and value. What is the MVP? And prioritizing based on the business vision, the tech feasibility, as well as the customer value. Like thinking about, that CSAT question, thinking about your needs to do this job, how would you rate this experience? If you put in a low fidelity or whatever, high fidelity, any prototype, if the feedback from that 6 people or however many you tested with is quite poor, then maybe it's not ready to even be in an alpha. So you need to understand the why. And once you understand what that is. The prioritization, like to your point, Christian, doesn't come from necessarily models, but it comes from understanding the customer pain and what you're bringing to the world, the value. So yeah, I agree with you from that sense. Sometimes we focus too much on the methodologies and the canvases and not on, you know, what we're hearing from people. Cool. And last question, I think, because it's great to see everyone answering questions, which is fantastic, is would you invest in creating a high fidelity version of designs when conducting usability testing, or rather go with a mid fidelity one with some dummy content?
So I think that depends on what your dummy content is and how important it is for the validation here. So if you're going to put lorem ipsum text in, it's probably a bad idea. But I think you can definitely downscale your design. Like, it doesn't need to be extremely beautiful in most cases. And you know, maybe you didn't have the perfect 16 margin all the way down in your app design or whatever. I think you can cut corners, try to get, you know, the main value and main flow very clear to the person you're testing on. So yeah, know where to cut the corners.
Definitely. And can you just, I was gonna stop you there, but I didn't want to break you. Can you just tell people why we don't use lorem ipsum?
I think it's just something you're never gonna meet in real life. Like, it's just a weird thing. Like, if you test people with lorem ipsum, they're gonna be super confused that there's this, you know, weird language, because they probably don't know lorem ipsum. And if they actually do, they're still gonna wonder, like, what part of this interface, you know, is behind this, you know, glyph of a text. So you're not gonna get a real experience when doing that.
Yeah, for sure. And I've seen that in a lot of usability tests. Sometimes like designers like to cut corners and just kind of copy paste designs. But if you put it in front of a user, especially one that's never done testing before, they're going to expect real life. So also don't put in, if you're doing property, something worth millions of dirham if it's actually inaccurate. Because the first thing they'll notice is, whoa, what's going on? So you want to show something in your, even if it's low fidelity, something that's closer to real life. But I totally agree with you, as if we don't do any testing and we only test our high fidelity and we pivot, then that's a waste of design time, and we need to minimize waste. So the sooner you test, the better. And if you're lucky enough, to have a mature design system, you may not even need to be, you know, like testing that high fidelity. Were there any other questions? Anything else anyone wanted to ask, or any other thoughts you had, Christian?
No, I don't think I have anything else.
Is a tool we use the property file? Oh, okay, sorry. No, I think that was it. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. We do have our next meetup at the end of next month. I'm just finalizing with a few speakers. If there are topics you're interested in hearing, or if you want to speak, then please reach out to me direct on LinkedIn is usually the best. And it'd be great to hear from you. So thanks again, Christian. It was really great, and a great discussion we've had. And thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for joining, and thanks for listening to my preach.
Awesome. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Great. Have a nice evening.